Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Paul Donaher and I'm Director of Client Services here at Radius, and thanks to all of you for attending today's webinar on how to transform your messaging. And firstly, as always, I hope everyone is staying safe and is doing well in our current environment. The webinar today will be given by the two people that you see beside me here on the screen, Angelia McFarland, who is Director of Product Marketing at Dell, and Mike Jennings, who is Senior Vice President of Client Services here at Radius. The webinar is scheduled for a maximum of 45 minutes, and you can type a question if you would like to do so onto the screen, and we'll have Angelia and Mike respond to that towards the end. Of the 45 minutes allotted, we've scheduled this. Angelia and Mike will speak for about the first 30 to 35 or so we should have time for your questions at the end. And by way of introduction to today's webinar, among other topics, you'll come away with an enhanced understanding as to three main topics, I think: why messaging optimization and testing are essential, how to develop a program that provides success today and tomorrow so we can future-proof that, and finally, the importance of engaging stakeholders and team members throughout the optimization process. You'll hear from Angelia and Mike on real-world ways to optimize messaging and how this has provided many benefits for Angelia at Dell. Of course, it's worth pointing out, like many of you, we are bunkered down in our home offices or tucked away in a corner of our homes. And as such, please forgive us if you hear a noisy child or a noisy spouse, dog or a cat or whatever it might be in the background. We'll do our best to minimize background noise or any small technological snafu. And so to our two speakers. Mike Jennings is a senior member of our client services team here with over 25 years of experience in the industry. And in this graphic here, as Mike educated me, Mike, who is a keen race car enthusiast, thinks about the racing line and how he can employ that in his work. So the racing line, the approach into the turn is done so by slowing as minimally as possible, if at all. You use all of the track then to ensure the fastest exit. And so approaching that from a professional standpoint, Mike looks at the objective, the issue, or the desired result, which is the turn. And then by slowing, you prepare by using all of the available information available to you, including market insights, to discover the most efficient and compelling path, which we'll call the apex here, to drive growth, which we'll call the exit. Angelia, far more straightforward introduction to Angelia, is Director of Product Marketing, as I said, at Dell, Program and Operations. She's proven over her career her innate ability to transform vision into results, and is adept at getting buy-in for innovative programs like the one that you're going to hear about today to drive subsequent implementation. Angelia is also passionate about people and is an acknowledged leader in developing high-performing employee relationships and customer-first marketing programs. And with that brief introduction, Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. And thanks again, Angelia, for joining us today, and everyone who's in attendance. A little background: we've been working with Dell for over a decade now on a variety of initiatives. And over the past several years, we've been working much more closely with Angelia and the server and networking solutions teams over there at Dell. We're taking their existing marketing materials and optimizing them for external consumption. One of the big challenges Angelia and I have is that our marketing messages are made in a way that they must speak to products and solutions for IT professionals across the globe. So there's a global aspect to it. And as one might imagine, IT pros are a fairly discerning group where one must really delicately balance the need for their needs for a deep technical understanding of what the product and solution is, coupled with marketing Dell's specific benefits to the offering. And it's a core tenet of messaging to these individuals. Angelia and I are going to talk a bit about how much we both value the approach to refining the initial marketing messages that are drafted to strike that balance, to really drive clarity and positive delivery to the marketplace. It's one of the tool we use is one of several that Radius uses to support our clients' marketing and communications efforts. So Angelia, can you talk a little bit about how the need for messaging research in general came about within your organization, and why you looked specifically to include the customer perspective in your strategy?
Sure, Mike. I've been in product marketing in IT for most of my career, and methods have changed over the years, but it's always critical when you're doing messaging to get a customer perspective, because we have perceptions from being inside the organization and from talking to or looking at our competitive messages. But those perceptions we find when we go to customers are not always true. So it's always critical for us, for me and for us at Dell, to make sure that we have a customer perspective in everything that we do. Additionally, just the work that we do from a product perspective, anytime you create a new product, you always want to do some research, but that's not enough. That doesn't translate always into messaging. We know what it is we want the product to provide to customers, but how we explain that to customers is not necessarily the same type of language. And another important fact is a lot of times when we develop messaging, it's for something new. It's some feature that's new, it's some product that is new to market. And so it's really important that we go out and we test the different types of concepts, verbal concepts that'll translate these wants and needs that we think we're delivering into things that make sense to our customers.
That's a wise way to think about things, because sometimes, with product engineers, they have a specific way of thinking things should be explained, and it's not necessarily in the language of the folks who are meant to be using and considering what you're providing.
Absolutely. And there's one other thing too, Mike, is that typically as marketers, we have an opportunity to get in front of our customers on a monthly basis. But during the pandemic, all of the trade shows, all of these opportunities that we've had to talk to customers have either gone away or gone virtual. And so messaging or message testing and getting in front of our customers and having intimate, in-depth conversations with them about the things that they want and need and how they articulate those has become even more critical during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a good point. We see that across industries. Many of our clients have been sort of taking the same ideology. They're not in front of their customers as often. They're not hearing from them as much. So doing some research to keep that information flow going is critical. So I want to take a step back for just a second and talk through what we have been doing for you and Dell. The approach that's been helpful for us, as you know, Angelia, we call it the real-time concept optimizer, or RTCO for short. And this approach provides an agile presentation, feedback, and reworking of concepts directly with the target audience, listening to your customers, engaging them in the process, right? The approach is applicable for many initiatives, such as new products and advertising. It can be standalone or part of a larger innovation in this initiative. When thinking about Dell and your needs, Angelia, those concepts that we're referring to have been your messaging.
Yes.
So exactly. So what we've been doing is presenting your team's initially drafted messages, how they wanted to take the marketing to the world and putting those in front of your IT pros in a group setting, a focus group setting, and getting their initial feedback in terms of, do these messages make sense? Are they motivating me? What's considered fluff or not needed? Is there anything in here that we should refine or completely scrap? And we specifically ask for ideas from the IT pros, the group, the target audience, in terms of how to specifically improve those messages. I know with you, we've been finding that smaller groups, 3 to 4 people, work very well, and evaluating usually 4 to 5 message constructs works best. I know, I think it was the first one we did with you, Angelia. We tested 6 different message pillars, and
yeah, that one was fun.
Yeah, I think we ended in a good place, right?
We did.
Yeah, but I think we ultimately agreed that let's try to keep it a little bit tighter so we can go a little deeper on some of them. So, but you know, six did work. So I did want to ask, how do you go, thinking back to before you know, we're going to the testing phase, how do you go about drafting the initial content that we do take into the RTCO process?
We always go back and we cast a wide net and we listen. We listen to all of our stakeholders. We listen to the business stakeholders, listen to the product stakeholders, to sales, and that can take a lot of different forms. Sometimes it's just a feedback meeting where they come in and they talk about the product and what the product's going to be. And it also depends on what it is we're messaging. Are we messaging the portfolio? Are we messaging a specific product? And it's important to us to make sure that we start from there. So we listen, we get all of the feedback in, and then as a marketing team, we sit down, we align, we refine, and then we prioritize, and we come up with a set of concepts that we then provide to you for testing. And the benefit of that is we still have everything. Right, that prioritization is very important. We still have everything, so as we're going through the testing, if there is something that maybe we left off the table, we still have that available to us. And the beauty of this process is we have the ability to potentially infuse it if we need to.
Yeah. So in that listening process where you're drafting it, drafting the messages, going back to when you were developing all of these things, were there things that you learned in that process that were working, where to spend your time versus simply going straight into the optimization process with the pros?
Yeah, it's always about resources, Mike. And so if I had unlimited resources, I would always test with customers. And it's not even just my resources, right? It's the time of our customers, because we want to be respectful of that, and we want to, their time is valuable, just as valuable as ours. And so because we can't always put everything in front of a customer, we have to make sure that we have a process to figure out what's important enough to go in front of a customer for testing like this and what isn't. And I think where we try to always focus it are on areas, and this is hard for a marketer sometimes, is in the areas where things are new, or we identify from a business perspective they're kind of not happening the way that we want them to happen, because what we try to avoid is being in this ivory tower. I'm from Michigan, and I remember when Toyota and Honda and those other companies came over and ate Ford and GM's lunch. And for me, it was a case of they saw all of these cars, these American cars driving around the street in Detroit. But everywhere else in the country, there were other vendors' cars being purchased, and so it's that ivory tower concept that says, "Oh yeah, we're sitting here, we see," and I've always tried to avoid that in my career. And so when I feel that I'm getting to that point, I always want to try and go out and get some customer feedback.
Great, that's good. It's a good analogy. Good story there. So going back to the RTCO, next, after we've reviewed and refined those initially drafted messages that Dell brings with our first group of professionals, we bring together our crack team of experts. That would be the research team, the marketing and product teams over at Dell, and a concept writer. In this case, it's a concept writer for messaging. And we sit down, we rework those messages based on what we learned in the group. We then take the reworked messages and present those to a second group of IT professionals, where we repeat the process of refining them further. Then I'm making some additional changes with the expert team as appropriate, and then taking the output from that second session into a third group of IT pros. And typically what we see, and I think, Angelia, you would probably agree with this, that after the third group, we're typically pretty much fully optimized in terms of the qual sessions. And our final expert refinement session is more of just some minor tweaking. And I'm going to have us take a look at some of the output from the work that we do. But since the information, the Dell specific concepts tested and results are confidential, we've changed figures and revised all the messaging to reflect the security industry as an example. So here, Angelia, can you tell us a little bit about the iteration process and messaging? Here we're showing like an initial versus second versus a third presentation. Can you tell us how this process works and plays out from your perspective?
The thing that we love the most about this process, Mike, is the fact that people are now talking a lot about agile marketing. And this is absolutely, and you mentioned it earlier as you were introducing the RTCO concept. It really is an implementation of agile marketing. It is real time, moving the message, and it takes you beyond the A/B testing, right? I mean, a lot of people, and A/B testing still has a place. But this is kind of, to me, another turn of the crank, because we put the message in with the best that we think we can do, and every single time we hear something from customers that we didn't know. And this process gives us the opportunity to make changes on the fly, run it through another group, and see if we were right, and if there was anything else that we missed. And each time it just gets more and more refined and tighter until we get to a message in that final group. Typically, by the time we get to the final group, we're hearing the same things, and that's when we know that, yeah, this is a solid message.
So also, as part of step 2, we had our IT pros go through and identify, we refer to it as the P's, that would be the positives and the problems with each message. And from that, we get a very clear understanding of what's viewed as a strength versus where something might be confusing, misleading, this might be taken the wrong way, and what's not needed. And the way we present it here to Angelia's team is in terms of a green, a red, and a yellow in terms of what's a problem versus what needs to be reworked. This works well for you, right, Angelia? Yeah,
it works great. It works great from the perspective of messaging. Sometimes when you're dealing with an engineering team, and if you're in a technology organization, there's a scientist or an engineer or someone who's developing your product, and messaging can be esoteric to them. And so this is a real concrete, this stoplight chart. Everybody knows red is bad, quote unquote bad. I mean, it's not necessarily bad. It tells us something. But it's really easy for our engineering teams to see. And the other benefit of it, Mike, that we love the most is you do it in phrases. So a lot of times when we would do messaging in the past, we take the whole message through the focus group, and it would come back and we would talk about the whole message. this gives us enough information to be able to refine and to move things around and to understand areas that are really important for our downstream efforts as well. So like, for example, in this, we talk about standard approach, right? It's great for this message, but it also helps us in our downstream deliverables as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about, in that day of reworking the messages, as we see here, how they were reworked, in working with a concept writer to sort of put that all together?
Yeah, it was when you brought the process to us the first time and we began to talk about it, and the opportunity to have an expert in the room was something that for me was new, right? And a skilled expert, right? So we have our team of experts, of marketing experts, but our writer was specifically skilled in writing, and it was again something new. But what we found is that she had a completely different perspective, and we had blind spots that she didn't have. And additionally, sometimes we get a little fast and loose with the grammar. She was able to help keep us, to where we needed to be. And it was invaluable having that expert in the room.
Yeah. That's good to hear. I'm glad you have that perspective. Moving on, the next part of the process, our third step in what we've been doing for you is taking the IT pro and the expert team's optimized content to an online survey. And we view it as a validation phase, because we feel pretty good about the messaging, but we really want to get that statistical reliability and some key metrics, which we'll get into in a moment, amongst the larger population of pros. So post-optimization, we really have that solid base. We have numbers around each of the components for each of the messages, which I think is something that benefits you. Prior to using this sort of approach and method, how did you approach message testing in the beginning, and going through these steps? How's it really changed internally for you, and how it's perceived?
A lot of it was subjective, and it was holistic. Again, it was like, this message, these 4 lines of words are good. The RTCO gives us granularity and helps us to figure out which parts and pieces of the message could be moved around to make it better. And it also helps us across that message understand which ones are most critical to the customer, which ones are more believable, which ones are more likely to get them to purchase, and it allows us to make judgment calls. Right now we're just making those judgment calls at the message level, but over time it gives you the ability to even make those judgment calls at the persona level, right? So you can see 62% security on the whole, but you all, whenever we ask, you can dig even further into those numbers, and we might find that security for a specific target audience is even more important. And so having these numbers is great, and it's also great again with these scientific stakeholders that we have. It gives us the ability to be able to back up our decisions with numbers, and typically our engineers don't they don't question numbers.
Right, they're numbers oriented folks, right? So
yes,
less on the touchy feely. So having a mix of both really, I think, brings it home to them. Here's one of the things from step 3, which is the quantitative step, that I like because it mirrors the qualitative in a way. We use a text highlighting tool, which allows people to take those message fragments or pieces of our messages, the phrases and words, and tell us what they like, what they didn't like, etc. So I like the ability to be able to do something similar to what we did in the first phase in a quantitative fashion. So as you mentioned, Angelia, engineers love seeing the numbers behind these things. So in the prior, we know a few people didn't like this or some people didn't like that. Here we can actually put numbers attributed to those fragments.
And on this slide, the other cool thing about this slide, Mike, is usually when we test, and the way we've been doing it is we test in the US. And so the quantitative phase gives us the ability to go global. And so the benefit of seeing in green and red, right, with different regions, back to our, this isn't personas, but this is regional messaging, which regions value things in different ways. And we've been able to use that in some of our downstream deliverables as well.
Yeah, good point. Why do you think, you kind of touched on this a bit, but when it all boils down to, why do you think this approach has worked so well for you and the broader team at Dell?
It is absolutely the fact that it's structured yet flexible, or even agile, because that's a term that everyone's using now. The structure gives us the ability to present it to our stakeholders in a way that is difficult to question's not the right word. It's not so much that we don't want them to question it, but it is, we give them a framework around which to question it. And before, when we would do messaging, it was just about everybody's opinion. Well, I don't like it, right? And I'm not always the customer. And so this gives us a framework where they can look at the numbers and they're able to provide their input and any questions in a structured way. The other piece is the flexibility of it. It gives us the ability to iterate. It gives us detailed, specific information during the process and even after the process that allows us to potentially make changes in the future. And so that combination of structure and flexibility for us has been very valuable.
So you mentioned downstream, I think, talking about using the information going forward. What sorts of things, can you give us an example of what you've carried forward and how you've shifted your thinking, so to speak, on how to put messaging onto some products?
So, for us, messaging, and I think people have different perceptions on what messaging is, but messaging is the concept I want to get across. It's not always the copy. And so we leverage the messaging work, and the RTCO also gives us a lot of insights on what we can say from a copy perspective as well. But we leverage the RTCO work in videos and point of view documents. And most recently, after we finish an RTCO and we lay out the message, we create a point of view document that is basically a narrative that allows a sales rep or internal person to be able to take the message and tell that story that we want them to tell to a customer or a prospect. And so it has legs beyond just saying, hey, I think a lot of times what we do is we say, hey, this is the message, and then we go do something else. This process gives us the ability to say, hey, this is the message, and this is how we're going to use it. And there's one other thing that you and I've talked about a lot that we found that was very important, and the benefit of having worked with you over multiple projects is in one of our early projects, we identified some wording. The word happened to be effortless, that customers just couldn't. And every time we would test in a future phase, that thought from a customer that just was not believable kept coming up over and over again. And it gave us the ability to, as we did these downstream deliverables, created these downstream deliverables, now we're careful. We know that that's a word. And it's not that they thought the word was bad, right? It's just they didn't believe it. They didn't believe anything was effortless. And then you brought up the point that it wasn't just that they didn't believe it, but it's saying, well, I do this job. Are you trying to tell me that this job's not important because it's effortless? And so all of those different insights came from being able to sit down and talk to our customers, and being able to iterate throughout this process and feed things in so that we could learn more about whatever concept we wanted to learn about.
You certainly don't want your messaging to be off-putting, perceived as demeaning to anyone. So that was a learning I think we got from that one. So basically, as we're saying here, use what you've learned as a reference point for everything else you do beyond that. So you've carried through
Yes.
learning. Yep. So a key part of the RTCO process, whether for messaging like we do with you, Angelia, or for product or service concepts development, is to include key stakeholders and partners of the organization. That could mean the product team, the brand team, the marketing team. It could be your external advertising partners. It could be your legal team if we're doing claims type work. There could be others. How do you determine who should be involved in our process?
Yeah, we cast a wide net. We don't leave anyone out. Anyone who wants to participate in the process. There are certain people that have to participate in the process, right? The product owners, our other marketing stakeholders, they have to participate in the process. Sales, but we allow everyone in because you can't really argue with feedback that you're getting from your customer. There's nothing more important than hearing directly from your customer what they think.
Right. What about how they're involved? Are they involved throughout the entire process? So are you bringing these folks in to talk about drafting the initial messages, helping them craft them? Are they attending the groups? Are they helping in those work sessions in between? How are you bringing them in? Where are you bringing?
We like to invite everyone to the actual groups because it is a focus group, a virtual focus group, and the benefit of being virtual is in the past you didn't want 100 people at a focus group. Theoretically, we could invite 100 people so they could hear directly from our customers, and they can come in and out as they please based on their schedule. So we try to invite everyone to the groups so that they can actually hear directly from the customer. But most of them are involved up front in providing their goals, their objectives, their insight, and then after the process and as we compile all of the learnings, we bring them back in and we provide them with the views that you've shown previously, right? The stop late charts, the relevance numbers, and we provide and we let them know what our perception of all of this data is and what we recommend as a message.
Yeah, I know with some of the sessions we've done with you, we've had like a whole separate room full of people observing. And I know we didn't bring them in directly for the work sessions. I don't know if you were getting text messages or emails like they need to say this, they need to change this word in the background. But
all
yeah.
the time. Yes, that was happening. And the benefit of that, Mike, is that now these people feel like they're, especially when they do it and then they hear the facilitator say it, that is and I do want to hit that. The value of the facilitators that you all bring cannot be matched. A facilitator that can just shift on the fly like your facilitators do is critical because we have thrown all types of things at her and one, you don't even see her read it off the screen, and then all of a sudden it comes out of her mouth, and whoever sent that question in, now they're hearing the customer respond directly to whatever question. And that has also been valuable in the follow-on and the stakeholder meetings where we can identify that, hey, you said this, we did this, and this is what the customer said.
Yeah. Have there been any sticking points for anyone on your end in terms of the results of what we're doing? And if there has been, how have you dealt with that?
The good thing about this is it's hard for people to argue about the results. They can say they just don't like it, and they can pull rank on you and say, you know, we're not doing this because I don't like it. But it's usually, we haven't had a lot of trouble with people saying there's the results are incorrect. We have had one person say, well, who did you talk to? And they said, you only talk to big companies. And we said, well, that was just one focus group, right? So we were able to say, and we did a quantitative afterwards. And there's nothing to stand on after that either. And so I think again, the benefit of it is it forces people to be more thoughtful in their responses, because they can't just say, I don't like it. They have to give us something thoughtful to go on to move forward.
Great. So a little bit about the validation. We know that one of the reasons we're doing the validation is to ensure that we are talking with a larger group of people, so that we have a reliable view of things, and we're not just relying on, you know, a small qualitative piece. How are you using the results from the validation phase specifically? And we're showing a few charts here, mocked up, obviously, blinded. But I
want to answer a little bit of a different question, Michael, because the value of the validation phase for us was as a marketing team sitting down and determining what was important. Because you all came to us and you said, we want to set up a benchmark for you. And what do you want to be in the benchmark? And we had to figure out what we wanted to be in the benchmark. And then we had to figure out how we wanted to weight it. And so as a marketing team, we had to sit down and have some really hard conversations. And that was what was really valuable to us. And then the fact that we were setting something up that allowed us to put some more structure around the process.
Yeah, you're referring to the customized composite score here, where we took multiple attributes and rolled them up. Yeah, so you guys I know you worked pretty hard on getting what those numbers should be, how they should be, you know, proportionalized between each other to come up with that composite score. It seems to be working well, though.
And committing to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We had to make a commitment.
Yeah, because one of the things we're doing is we are sort of comparing different campaigns against each other. And if you were to change the way you weighted that score, it could, you know, throw a wrench into all of your benchmarks. So,
yes.
You know, we've done 4 of these, and we're kind of showing a 4 example piece here. What are you using from these comparisons in terms of how are you using those in the process?
The comparisons have been great because they give us a benchmark. What does good look like? It's 80% good and 90% is great, right? And almost every time we do this, because we have that quantitative phase at the front, we're always above 60. I don't think I've ever seen anything that we've done that has been below 60. And I think we did get a little bit pushback from one of the management, from one of our executives about that is how is everything great? And we're like, everything wasn't great. We just got rid of the stuff that wasn't great in the qualitative phase. And so this is just a measure of how great everything that came out of the qualitative phase is. And so how we use that is to provide that benchmark and determine, okay, did we meet the bar this time? Did we meet the bar this time? And so this has also been very valuable, and it is a way that we haven't done messaging before. At least I haven't in my career, haven't had this comparative view of messages over projects or over a lifespan.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's great to hear when sort of, you know, as a researcher, we tend to think this is what we'd like to see our clients do and how they will use the information and where they're going to go with it. And what you're describing is exactly what we hope would happen. We strive for that. So it's good to hear. So what does the future hold for Dell in terms of using this approach and how it's going to be used? And what do you think we could be doing to make it even stronger for you?
Well, I hope there's a lot more RTCOs in our future. I would love to extend it beyond just messaging concepts. And you said early on, right? Messaging is not the only thing that you can optimize from a concept perspective.
Yep.
And potentially bring in some experts in design, experts in sales enablement. And I can think of all different types of ways that we can use the process moving forward. So that's one area. Another area is I know you and I have talked a couple times about measurements and KPIs. And so I think we've done a really good job of putting a frame of reference around the messaging process itself. But being able to move beyond saying, okay, we've got this message, we're pretty sure it's a good message. And then as we implement that message, are we still seeing the same things? Is it paying off for us? How much revenue is it driving? Is it increasing the revenue? Is it increasing the NPS? So that's another area that I would love to be able to move towards.
That's interesting. That's a really smart next step. I think trying to tie the efforts here against some internal metrics, some additional analysis on top of what you're collecting, out from your website, from your sales team, how many contacts, impressions, these things that you're collecting passively or, however, grafting that on here so we can understand how the messaging is driving that activity. That would be great. I know we're getting close on time. I'm going to thank you again for talking through this with us today, Angelia. And Paul, I'll pitch it back to you for any questions.
Can I say one more thing before we end, Mike? When we went to Radius and told them what we were going to do, and the other awesome thing about this process is you all were the only vendor that came back to us with an opinion. I believe the first RFP was we want to do 3 focus groups and this and this and this. You guys came to us and said, what are you trying to accomplish?
Right.
And we told you we were trying to accomplish, and you came back to us and you provided us with this process. And initially I was just excited that you came back and said something other to me other than what I asked you for, that you actually thought about it. And then I was even more excited when I found out that the process actually got us to where we were trying to go.
That's good.
I just really wanted to say I appreciate the partnership and thank you very much for introducing us to RTCO.
Likewise, Angelia. And I just want to say we did not pay you to say that. Paul,
thank you, guys. Yeah, one quick question. We've got time probably for one question, guys. If we do this on a global scale, I mean, I think the question is probably relating to pandemic and however we get the experts in the room, but how do we do this globally?
Well, I don't think it's much different. Obviously, conducting it virtually allows us the ability to do the work basically across multiple countries, but we want to think about differing languages and what different cultures are in play. So we would suggest obviously conducting separate sessions in each country of interest. I wouldn't try to simply apply English messaging to Japan or something. Of course, you have to start somewhere. So taking, maybe starting in the US like we do with Angelia, and then taking that refined messaging translated appropriately to another country could be the start point for refinement in that country. So I think it also applies to products. If you have products or messaging that you're trying to send to specific, very specific people, so you have different groups within not only country, but maybe it's in the US. Okay, I'm getting a little too dense here, but if I'm marketing to one group of people versus another, whether it's country or not, you really want to think about doing separate groups in that way. So that's how I think about it. In terms of differing groups need to have their own customized different sessions, refinement sessions. Hopefully I answered
And
that.
I would agree. I think from our perspective, we did have some international participation from Dell. But when we went and tested in the other regions, we worked with you on translations and we did it in the quantitative phase, but we could have just as easily also done it in the qualitative phase as well.
Right. Paul, you want to, we have any other questions? Do we have time? I think we are over time. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We'll be sharing out the recording of this if you want to share it with other folks who weren't able to make it on your team. And we do welcome you to send in questions that we didn't get to today on the webinar session. Thanks again, Angelia. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.